Hi, my name is Jack Amendolia, and I work for a firm called Watson and Associates. We were hired to help the board with the school boundary review that they're conducting for all their schools in the city of Oshawa. There are a lot of schools involved and a lot of moving parts, and the school board thought it would be helpful to do some short videos for each school community to explain why the board is doing a citywide boundary review in Oshawa and how it might impact their school communities.
So before we get into looking at how some of these accommodation decisions or scenarios that we're looking at specifically impact St. Anne and its school community, I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about process and a little bit about why a school board might do a boundary review.
The material that is being presented is based on options that the Board of Trustees agreed to have staff take to the community for input. These are not the final recommendations, but really are intended to provide potential options for your input and feedback. The committee, made up of various board staff, school principals, and a school council representative from each school, will review the feedback and then prepare final recommendations. Those recommendations will be brought back to all of Oshawa via virtual meeting on May 4th, 2023. So why does a school board do a school boundary review or an attendance area review? Well, there's a variety of reasons why a board might conduct a review. Right now, we're going to explore some of the main ones. One of the primary reasons is enrollment pressures, and that means when the enrollment at a school is significantly over what that school was built for. And a school board looks at boundary reviews or changing those boundaries as a way to try to alleviate that enrollment. Again, assuming there are schools close by or somewhat close by that can take that additional enrollment. The other reason why a board might consider a boundary review is when a new school opens. If that new school requires a new boundary and it impacts some of the existing schools, again, a boundary review may be necessary to determine what that new school's boundary will look like. Another reason is an enrollment imbalance, similar to the first point about enrollment pressures. The school board may have some schools that are significantly over capacity. They may have some schools that are under capacity, and they may need to just try to better balance or equalize enrollment for those various schools. And then the last one is program. So if a board has, for example, a French immersion program, and they are looking to either expand that program or offer it in a different way or change the boundaries of that program, that's another reason why a school board might do a boundary review. In the case of this review, and like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's a citywide review, fairly complex, a lot of schools involved. And the other thing is that all of these things, all of these reasons about why a school board might do a boundary review are present in some form in the City of Oshawa review.
So now we're going to take a look at some of the enrollments. What we're showing here on the table is all the schools that are involved in the Oshawa boundary review, both elementary and secondary. The column that says OTG refers to the school's capacity. So that's the on-the-ground capacity, which was really referring to the bricks and mortar capacity or the size the school was built for. Then we show the enrollments for every school by grade, all the way to JK to grade 8. We show total enrollment for the school based on 2022 October actual enrollments. Then the utilization rate in the last column is simply the enrollment related to the capacity of the school. The school is 300 capacity and 300 enrollment. It's 100% utilized. Any enrollment above that is over 100%. Enrollment below the capacity would be below 100%. When we look at St. Anne specifically, that's highlighted in that red box there, we see that the original school was built with a capacity of 412 students. It currently has 723 students, or at least based on October 31st, 2022 numbers, it was 723, utilization rate of 175%. And you can see that that's the highest utilization rate of any of the schools that are involved in this review. When we compare it to the rest of the schools in this review, we see that there's quite a variance. There's schools that are, like St. Anne, significantly over capacity. There's some schools that are under, some schools that are operating at. So quite a diversity in utilization rates when we look across the different schools. Also important to note, before we look at some of the options impacting St. Anne in a second, is that That 412 OTG capacity, the board has been approved for an addition at St. Anne. So the new capacity of the school, once the addition is built, is going to be 596. So the addition will add an extra 184 pupil places to the school. Utilization based on 2022 numbers, if that addition existed now, would drop from 175% to just over 120%. So when we look at the options in a minute, we've already incorporated the addition into the assumed options. So you'll see that 2022 utilization rate is not 175% in the options. It's actually starting at 121%. The next slide we want to look at, looking at the same thing, 2022 October enrollments by school. But what we've done here is we've just split it up by regular track English programming as well as French immersion programming, just so we have an idea of that split in enrollment. So you see at the very bottom row, about 537 total elementary French immersion students in the city of Oshawa right now, makes up about 11.5% of total enrollment. In terms of how that program's offered, it's offered at 3 elementary schools, St. Christopher, St. Kateri, and St. Thomas. Those are known as dual track schools that offer both English track regular programming as well as French immersion programming. So we're going to look a little bit at the what the boundaries look like. So we've talked about this school boundary review and highlighted a couple of tables and utilization rates and enrollments. But now we just want to get a sense of what do they look like spatially? What do these boundaries look like in size? Where are they located in the city? How do they look like in relation to each other? Where are the schools located within that boundary? So this map shows you all of those things. And then you can see at the very top in that green color inside that red circle is your school's boundary for St. Anne. The next slide really looks at the same thing. It looks at the schools and the boundaries that we just looked at on the previous slide. But what we've done here is we've just created a heat map related to the utilization rates I spoke about earlier. So anywhere you see sort of these orange colors or red colors, that means the school is highly utilized, so well over the capacity of the school. Anywhere you see more of these green colors, the schools are pretty much operating at capacity. Anywhere you see some of these cooler colors are where schools are operating below capacity. When we look at St. Anne, we see that it's currently in that orange color. So, like we said, between 151 and 200%. And when we look at what's going on going forward, again, this assumes that no addition, just if it maintained its regular capacity, it would obviously be over 200%, but that addition deals with a lot of those enrollment pressures.
The scenarios considered for part of this review really fall into a few main categories. The first one is school boundary changes. So we're talking about a traditional school boundary change where we look at moving the line to either make the boundary larger or smaller. The second is grade structure changes. So the new approved Monsignor Paul Dwyer Secondary School has been approved as a grade 7 to 12 school. So as part of this review, the board is interested in hearing from the community about possibly which grade 7 and 8 from which schools should go to the new secondary school. And the third main part of this review had to deal with French immersion programming. As we talked about previously, there's currently 3 dual track French immersion schools. So we looked at a diverse set of options all the way from status quo, leaving it as it is, to 1 single track facility for the whole city, multiple single track facilities, combinations of single track and dual track. So really all options were considered.
Now we're going to look at how some of the recommendations or some of the scenarios that we've discussed with the community to date specifically impact St. Anne. So if we look at this table, what we're looking at, again, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is the new OTG, the new permanent capacity of St. Anne with the assumed addition would be 596. New utilization rate based on that addition would be more like 120%. But as we saw when we looked at some of the projections, enrollment is going to continue going here. North Oshawa has been growing significantly. That's why we've seen the increases in enrollment at St. Anne. It's expected to continue growing at a pretty rapid pace, which will continue to put pressures on those North Oshawa schools. So in one scenario that was considered with the community, we looked at the new Monsignor Paul Dwyer Secondary School has been approved and is going to open as a grade 7 to 12 facility. So as part of this review, as we just talked about, one of the options was looking at grade 7 to 12 structures and what elementary schools might send their grade 7 and 8s there. So one option that was looked at was sending grade 7 and 8s from both St. John Bosco as well as St. Anne, two of those schools I just mentioned that have been growing rapidly in North Oshawa, and reducing their enrollments or reducing their enrollments by the grade 7 and 8s, and then becoming JK to 6 schools. So what would happen at St. Anne? So that utilization rate would further get reduced to about 100%. And then when we look at the projected enrollments going forward, much more reasonable in sort of that 105, 110% range. So it would have a significant reduction on its existing as well as future projected enrollment. So what would be the implications? I think pretty obvious in terms of what we just talked about. If this is an option that the board would go forward with, St. Anne would become a JK to 6 school, approximately 134 grade 7 and 8s based on existing enrollments. That'd be a little bit higher based on what's projected to come.
To finish off tonight's presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about what we've heard so far from the Oshawa community. So we've had a couple of community level meetings. We've had some committee level meetings. We've had a couple of surveys that have gone out to the public, as well as feedback that can be provided to the board through a general email address. And from that feedback, there's a couple of things that are starting to come from it. One thing that we're starting to hear is that there seems to be a preference for single track French immersion programming. There seems to be a preference for two facilities in the city of Oshawa rather than one. When I want specifically with regard to single track French immersion programming, a lot of the feedback wants to see a reduction in this enrollment pressure that we spoke about. There is a concern or a consideration to try as much as we can to keep communities together. And the public also wants us to consider, with regard to any changes that might be made, what transportation implications there are, how long students might be on a bus for. When we look at one question that we were asked, or that we asked the community early on in the process, what are some of the initial issues you see with some of the existing conditions at your school? You can see that about 50%, a little bit over 50% of the responses are either enrollment pressures or too many portables. So I think there's a clear understanding in the community that there's schools that are operating above capacity, and that something needs to be done to deal with some of that enrollment pressure. And that's why the board is undergoing this boundary review. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video tonight. I hope you found it informative. But if there are any questions, we will continue to reach out to the community. A lot of information can be found on the board's website, and a couple of meetings coming up. Thank you.